First off, what you're going to need is a hoop. So this hoop is 25 by 25 inches. You're also going to need this rug punch needle. This one is the number 10. I use it for all my projects and I absolutely love it. A pair of scissors is necessary. You can use big or small, whatever you want. And a Sharpie. Also monk's cloth. This is what it looks like up close. I buy this one on Amazon. You can also get it at Michael's or Joann's. And of course, your yarn. So these are all the tools that you're going to need to get started. Alright, so we're going to start by removing that outer circle. And then you're going to take your monk's cloth and put it over the inner circle. When you put the fabric over the inner circle, you really want to make sure that you have a good 1.5 to 2 inches room extra along the outside. By doing this, it just prevents that cloth from coming loose and really ultimately ruining your project. And we're going to cut this to size. Okay, so let's remove this excess fabric. I'm just going to set it aside for now. And we're going to take that outer circle and we're going to put it back over our inner circle. We're going to push it on there so it's snug, but not already completely tight. Okay, so we have our fabric over our circle. And as you can see, the fabric is super loose and pliable. You don't want this when rug punching. It's going to make your life very difficult, so we need to tighten this up. The way that I do that is I just work in a circular motion and I start by pulling the fabric, and I'm constantly pulling the fabric and then slightly tightening that outer circle as I go. Alright, so we're to a place where that fabric feels pretty difficult to pull and it's looking tight. I give it a feel, it feels great. It's got a nice bounce back to it and I'm happy with that. Okay, so we're going to turn it over real quick and we're going to cut off that excess fabric. When cutting, like I said, you want to make sure you have that 1.5 to 2 inches around the edge because you can always cut off more, but you definitely cannot put it back on. So better be safe than sorry. Alright, and we've got our finished prepared hoop. You are all set to begin punching. Okay, so I want to show you a few yarns. This one here is perfect. It's just the right size and it's going to float smoothly through your punch needle. This one's way too small. When you're punching with this, if you punch with this, it's going to come out as soon as you pull out your punch needle to move on to the next punch. And this one here is too thick. You can use it for weaving. You can use it with monk's cloth, but you just can't use it with the punch needle. When I'm making my creations, I use thick yarn, but I'm using this kind of large sewing needle to make that happen. So it's definitely possible to use this with monk's cloth. You can get some really cool chunky textures, just not with the punch needle. And this here is an example of the biggest that I would go as far as size of yarn. This one is just to the point of almost being too big. It might get a little bit difficult to punch with, but we're going to stick with this one right here. Alright, so this is the number 10 rug punch needle. This line right here is the line that you want to use to know which direction you need to travel. So as you're punching, you want that line to line up with the direction that you're wanting to punch your rug punch. You can take your yarn and I just simply roll it back and forth between my fingers and put it through the needle. As you can see, this yarn is the perfect size because it's floating easily through that needle. It's not too loose, it's not too tight, it's just right. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that yarn and then you're going to pull it through this center fold, and you're going to pull that string back and forth and pull it tight until you get to the point where you have just a little tail right here. All right, so we're just going to quickly draw a design on to the back of our hoop. And we're going to thread that needle just like I showed you earlier. So you're going to take that yarn and you're going to put it through the needle hole. Take the string, put it through the center fold, and then you're going to tug back and forth until you feel that it's nice and smooth, and leave that little tail. Now when rug punching, you want to make sure that you are punching the length of that needle. You don't want to go just halfway and then the whole way. You want to make sure that you're using the length of that needle. So you're going to punch in all the way. You don't want to pull it all the way out. You want to make sure that as you're punching, you're kind of just glazing the surface. And make sure that that line is in alignment with the direction that you're going. Punch in, skim the surface, punch in, skim the surface, and just keep going. You want to make sure that you have enough slack on your yarn that the string isn't going to be too tight, because if that happens, it's going to impede your ability to punch, and your yarn probably isn't going to work as effectively as you want it to. We're going to keep going right here, and you're going to punch your punch needle in all the way into the fabric. As the punch needle is in the fabric, you will turn your punch needle the direction that you want it to go, and you can keep on punching. I kind of turn my hoop accordingly, but depending on the size of your project, you may or may not want to actually turn your project. When punching with this method, you want to make sure that once you get a second row going, that you make those punches close enough together. So the great thing about rug punch is your ability to kind of just quickly fix mistakes or things that you don't like. So I'm going to show you here. So let's say that I'm punching and then I see that I'm a little bit too far away from the previous line, and I can see that monk's cloth. I don't like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my finger on the end of this. I'm going to hold that string and pull backwards until the desired point. I'm going to pull the string from the back until the needle is flush with the monk's cloth, and then you can just keep on punching. Alright, so I'm finishing right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull back on the punch needle slowly, not too quickly, and then I'm going to put my finger on the string that's visible, just enough so that I can take my scissors and clip this with a little tail. So if you want this to be the front of your project and have this kind of clean view, then you need to punch these strings back into the monk's cloth. However, if you want the opposite side to be in view, then you can just leave those tails hanging on that inside. I'm going to show you the other technique because I want you to see the comparison between the high kind of texture and that minimalist view on the opposite side. So we're going to take our rug punch needle and we're going to do the same exact technique, except instead of having it on the back side here, you're now going to have that texture on the front side of your hoop as well. Okay, so we're going to take our rug punch needle and we're going to do exactly what we were doing before, except now we are implementing this on the front of the hoop. So that way you're able to have this kind of clean and minimalist look in contrast to the previous, which is a little bit more of a fun texture. So when you're punching, you want to also keep into account that there's ultimately two various types of designs going on with this one technique. So from a macro perspective, you are creating a square, but from a micro perspective, you are also creating a design within a design. So you can punch in the direction of a square, you can punch kind of zigzag, or let's say you want to just go back and forth. Whatever you choose, that is a smaller design within the bigger design. In the back, and you're going to pull your punch needle out slowly and then trim that piece while still holding this loop. I'm just going to pull that little string back through. That way you can't see it at all. You would never even know it was there. And then, like I told you in the previous section, you're going to need to poke that little tail back in through the cloth. So since this is now the front of my canvas, I want to make sure that's not visible. So I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to trim this little tuft here. But I also want to show you another technique that gives you a different style and dimension. I don't know if there's a technical name for it, but I've started using it on a couple pieces that I have created, and I really enjoy it, and it's something that's also simple but effective. So I'm going to work right here just in this square. What you're going to do is enter your needle into the monk's cloth, and then you're just going to go in a back and forth motion. So it's super easy. You're just going to punch in, lift up slowly, punch in, and the distance between your punches for this is obviously a lot greater. But you want to make sure that as you're punching, each punch is very close, if not almost underneath the previous punch. All right, so one last punch. Here we go. You're going to punch that through. You're going to hold that string from behind, just like in the previous one. Pull that out, give it a clip, and then pull that string through the back. All right, so you're all done with this style. I also want to show you how to do a cut pile. So usually with a rug punch needle, it's a loop pile, but I want to show you how to do a cut pile as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to insert your punch needle in just like you would with this design here. And on the opposite side, you're going to hold that loop. So you're going to punch through and hold, punch through and hold that string. And I find that it's easier to do this from the opposite side, which I'll show you in just a moment. So I punch and I hold, and I'm going to keep on going. So as I'm punching on this side, I'm still holding that string on the opposite side. And with this technique, it doesn't really matter how close the lines are on this side, because ultimately people aren't going to see that side. All right, and as you can see, we've got this nice height, it's an added texture. This is a loop pile at the moment, but we're going to make it in a cut pile just simply by cutting it. All right, so we're going to give it a nice snip. Perfect. And as you can see, there's just like a nice added texture from this kind of technique. I see a few little loops kind of hanging out in there, so I'm going to give those a clip really quick. You don't want those in there, they're going to mess up that overall texture. You want everything to be uniform as much as possible. Give it a good little fluff, make sure there's nothing hiding in there, and just a final haircut. All right, so these are the 4 techniques that I've showed you. This is with the rug punch. It's just the basic punch. You got the cut pile here, which adds some fluffy texture. And then you have that back and forth stitch, which can be used in various ways. And last but not least, that very minimalist and sleek look as well. Alright, so we're going to move on to finishing up our product. So you've got your punch design all created, you like it, you're happy with it, and the overall effect is what you're looking for. So now we need to finish the back. And there are a couple options. I'm sure there are more than a couple options, but I tend to gravitate towards two options that I found that work best for myself. So the first option here is going to be an iron-on binding cloth. So this is perfect for a really lightweight product. If you want it to be kind of like a tapestry or a wall hanging, this is great to use. It doesn't need to be super heavy duty, but just something to kind of bind those loose fibers that might be hanging around in the back. So you just pull it across, put it to shape, and then what you would do is take an iron and simply iron over it. And as you iron, it's going to bind this fabric with the yarn below. So this is a super simple, cheap option. It does the trick. It's not super heavy duty, it's lightweight and relatively simple. I find it doesn't hold extremely well, but it definitely works. The second option is glue. So what I would take is Elmer's glue, and I have just a utility cloth here that I would put as the backing. This one's super simple, nothing really special about it. But I'm going to take that Elmer's glue, I would pour it all over the back of this canvas, and take my paintbrush and simply paint a nice even layer all over the back of this. Yes, so you want a nice even layer, you want to make sure all of the yarn that's visible is covered. And then you would simply take your backing cloth while that glue is still wet, and you would want to make sure, of course, that the piece fits the whole entire piece, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to show you the half of it. You would put it over the back of the cloth, press it in, and you want to make sure you push it into those corners so that it's fully covered, and let that glue sit overnight and dry. In the morning, once it's all dry, you're going to take your scissors and you're going to cut off that excess fabric.